We're on the first floor of Gloucester Waterways Museum today, and at the moment the warehouse is being stripped back of all its displays, blackout on the windows, and the collection has been moved out of the way because we're undertaking refurbishment works of the building. This is really exciting because it's helping us to understand the way it was constructed and used over the 100+ years that it was a grain warehouse. And also it's revealing some of its secrets as to how it was used. The warehouse was built in 1873 for Waite, James and Co., who were corn merchants in Bristol. And it was a state-of-the-art building. It's 6 stories high plus an attic, and it's quite large. It's about 30 metres long, 20 metres wide. And it's a really interesting building. It's made of low-bearing masonry construction, but also, as you can see, within the depth of the building there are lovely cast iron columns and also these large beams, wooden beams, that work alongside the iron columns. A wooden floor which would have been pine when it was initially built, and it has gone through a number of repairs over many years. Something I find particularly fascinating with the wooden structure, the wooden beams, is they actually work in pairs running across each set of columns, and each beam runs across the equivalent of 2 bays worth of the building. One side you have the join on one side of the beam, but then when you walk round to the other side of the column, it's actually in the middle of the beam. So that takes the pressure off any one column in terms of the structural loading. At the base of the column, because the iron structure, the iron vertical structure, is much more unforgiving and won't have settled over time, but the floor is much more forgiving and has settled over time, you get a dome effect in the wooden floor around the base of each of the columns. When the warehouse was built in 1873, there wouldn't have been any glass in these windows. They would have been open for the purpose of ventilation rather than getting light into the building. They probably would have had shutters on them. So if you can imagine, there would have been all sorts of weather blowing in through these windows. And you can see that there's staining on the brickwork below, where rain would have run down the face of the building. And also it's interesting that around the perimeter of the building there's historically been repairs to the floorboards. Again, because of this rain and wind coming in, there would have been far more wear and tear at the perimeter. Also, through the refurbishment works we've been doing, we have found that there would have been an extra bit of structure in the floorboarding, this pine floorboarding, presumably because they knew that the boards would shrink. Then there was a little metal insert, a little metal strip put between each of the boards, and we actually have a sort of mock-up here to show that. So this is the board, and then here is the neighbouring board, and there would have been a little bit of metal put in between to basically continue the rigidity of the structure, and also to presumably prevent dust from falling from one floor to another, because it would have been very dusty in here, and also possibly to prevent the spread of smoke and fire if a fire should have broken out in the warehouse. The rather lovely cast iron columns that support each of the floors in this building, which there's one here, there are 33 on each floor, 3 rows of 11. You can see them going off into the distance there. They're rather lovely. They're part of the Gloucester story, part of the Gloucester Dock story, and you can see actually on each of the column who the makers were. It's J.M. Butt and Co., Iron Founders Gloucester, and that iron foundry, I believe, was in existence for about 100 years, was quite a major employer in Gloucester, and was based near Kingsholm. I think it closed around the 1930s, but as I say, it is part of the Gloucester story that the columns were made within the city. As part of the new gallery displays, we have taken out quite a large feature that was part of the old museum, which was the lock that was in this space here. So it was designed to represent a lock chamber, and there was a lock gate and beam as well. And most of that has been taken away. We've kept the dished brick floor and also the very end of the feature, which will be lined. And the new purpose is actually to have a sculptural feature in here. It'll be a representation of a seven-trow boat made out of metal and rope, and we will basically keep the two spaces open, although we'll need a handrail around the upper floor, just so that the museum feels like it's kind of one space across the two floors, but we'll have this wonderful centrepiece as a real eye catcher.